He had more friends, more energy, and ironically, a much larger bank account. The two men lived in the same town with the same weather and the same customers. The only difference was how they viewed the flow of the world. One held his breath, the other breathed deep. The boy from the cotton mill. In 1848, a 12-year-old boy named Andrew Carnegie arrived in Pennsylvania. He wasn't a rich heir or a lucky genius. He was a poor immigrant from Scotland who had just spent weeks on a crowded ship. His family was so broke, they had to borrow money just to make the trip. Andrew's first job was as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill. He worked 12 hours a day in a loud, hot room for just over $1 a week. At that time, the world was a very fixed place. If you were born poor, people expected you to stay poor. The air in Pittsburgh was thick with coal smoke, and the lives of the workers were often just as dark. Andrew could have easily become like Elias. He could have spent his life counting his pennies and fearing the cold. But Andrew had a different internal radio station playing in his head. Even when he was scrubbing floors, he was looking for the flow. He moved from the cotton mill to a telegraph office. He didn't just deliver messages, he memorized the faces of every important person in town. He learned how to read the clicks of the telegraph by ear, a skill very few had. He was always looking for ways to be more useful, to give more value, and to keep his energy moving forward. By the time he reached middle age, Andrew Carnegie was the richest man in the entire world. He had built a steel empire that changed the face of America. But as his piles of gold grew higher, he ran into a problem that many successful people face. He realized that simply getting wasn't enough. He saw other wealthy men who were lonely and bitter. They had reached the top of the mountain, only to find it was a very cold place to sit. In 1889, Carnegie wrote something that shocked the high society of the time. He called it the Gospel of Wealth. In it, he argued that wealth wasn't meant to be hoarded. He believed that a person who died with millions of dollars tucked under their mattress was a failure. He said that the science of abundance required a person to let the money flow back out into the world. He didn't just talk about it, he did it. He spent the rest of his life giving away $350 million, which would be billions today. He built over 2,500 public libraries. He believed that if you provided people with the tools to learn, the flow of success would continue long after he was gone. Carnegie discovered a secret that most people miss. Abundance is not a destination. It is a loop. If you break the loop by gripping too tightly, the abundance stops coming to you. The law of circulation. To understand why Arthur succeeded and Elias struggled, or why Carnegie felt the need to give his money away, we have to look at a concept called the law of circulation. Think of your life like a physical body. For you to be healthy, your blood must move. It has to leave the heart, travel to your toes, and come back again. If your blood decided to save itself and stop moving in one spot, that part of your body would die. Nature works the same way. A forest is abundant because it is constantly recycling. Leaves fall, they turn into soil, and that soil feeds the next tree. There is no waste in nature, only transformation. When we humans get scared, we try to step outside of this natural law. We think that if we hold on to our money, our love, or our ideas, we will have more of them. The opposite is actually true. When you hold on too tight, you send a signal to your subconscious mind that there isn't enough. You are tuning your internal radio to the scarcity station. This creates a physical feeling of stress. Your shoulders tighten, your breathing gets shallow, and your brain moves into survival mode. When you are in survival mode, you cannot see opportunities. Your brain is literally blocked from being creative. You might walk past a help wanted sign for your dream job and never even see it because you are too busy worrying about the $5 you just spent on lunch. Abundance is the state of living in flow. It means trusting that the universe is a place of plenty. This isn't just a nice thought, it is a mindset that changes how your brain works. When you believe there is enough to go around, your brain stays in creation mode. You become like Arthur the shopkeeper. You look for ways to help, ways to give, and ways to grow. And because you are looking for those things, you find them. The woman who saw the end. Many years after Carnegie, a woman named Sarah Blakely was struggling. She was selling fax machines, door to door in the Florida heat. It was a tough job. People would slam doors in her face, and she spent most of her days feeling tired and frustrated. She didn't have a business degree or a pile of money. But Sarah had a habit. Every day, she would sit in her car and visualize a specific outcome. She didn't just think about having money. She visualized the feeling of her product being sold in stores all over the country. She lived in the flow of that future success before it even happened. One day, she had an idea for a new kind of undergarment. She didn't have the tools to make it, and she didn't know anyone in the fashion industry. But because she had trained her mind to look for flow rather than walls, she didn't stop when things got hard. She used her own savings, only $5,000, and worked on her idea nights and weekends. She eventually created Spanx. Today, she is one of the most successful self-made women in the world. Sarah often says that her success didn't come from her stuff, but from her ability to stay in a state of abundance even when she was broke. She didn't grip her $5,000 in fear. She circulated it into her dream. She didn't wait for a lucky break. She acted as if the abundance was already there, just waiting for her to catch up to it. The grocery store choice. Sarah Jenkins stood in the grocery store aisle, staring at a box of generic dish soap. It was $2 cheaper than the brand that smelled like lemons, the one she actually liked. Her hand reached for the cheap one automatically. "I can't afford the good stuff," she whispered to herself. She felt that familiar weight in her chest. It was the same weight she felt when she looked at her credit card bill, or when she saw her coworkers getting coffee together while she stayed at her desk to save money. For Sarah, the world was a series of no's. No, you can't have that. No, you aren't rich enough. No, you have to be careful. Then, she remembered what she had been reading. She thought about the internal radio dial. She realized that by choosing the cheap soap just to save $2, she was telling her brain, "I am a person who doesn't have enough." She was practicing the feeling of being poor. She put the generic soap back. She picked up the lemon-scented bottle. It felt silly, and her heart raced a little. Was she being irresponsible? But then she looked over at the flower section near the checkout. There was a small bouquet of bright yellow daisies. They were $5. Sarah's old self screamed, $5 for something that will die in a week? That's crazy. But Sarah took a breath. She thought about the law of circulation. She thought about how she wanted to feel, abundant, cared for, and successful. She realized that she couldn't wait until she had $1 million to feel abundant. She had to start the flow right now with what she had. She picked up the daisies. When she got to the register, she didn't look at the floor or sigh as she swiped her card. She looked the cashier in the eye and smiled. She felt a tiny spark of power. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't a victim of her bank account. She was making a choice. She was acting as if she were a person who could afford a $5 luxury. As she walked to the bus stop, the smell of the lemons and the sight of the yellow flowers made her feel lighter. Her radio dial had shifted just a tiny bit away from the static of scarcity station. She wasn't rich yet, but she was no longer practicing being poor. The two mindsets. Psychologist Carol Dweck has spent decades studying how people handle challenges. She found that most people fall into one of two categories: a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset are like Elias. They believe their talents, their wealth, and their opportunities are set in stone. If they don't have something now, they believe they will never have it. They see the world as a pie with a limited number of slices. If someone else gets a big slice, they feel like there is less for them. This creates a life of competition, jealousy, and gripping. People with a growth mindset are like Arthur or Carnegie. They see the world as an expanding garden. They believe that they can develop their skills, and that new opportunities can be created out of thin air. They don't worry about someone else's slice of pie, because they know they can just bake more pies. Abundance is essentially a growth mindset applied to the entire universe. It is the belief that the source of things, money, love, ideas, is infinite. We see this in the blue zones of the world. These are places like Okinawa, Japan, or Sardinia, Italy, where people live much longer than average. Researchers found that these people don't necessarily have the most money. What they have is an abundance of connection. They share their food, their time, and their worries. They live in a constant state of circulation with their neighbors. Because they don't grip their lives in isolation, their bodies stay younger and their minds stay sharper. They are living proof that abundance isn't just about what is in your wallet. It is about how you move through your day. How to start the flow. You might be thinking, that's great for Andrew Carnegie, but I have bills to pay. The secret to moving into a state of abundance isn't about the amount of money you have. It's about the certain way you do things. This is a phrase from Wallace Wattles, a man who wrote about wealth over 100 years ago. He said that to get rich, you don't do certain things, you do things in a certain way. Doing things in a certain way means performing every act with the feeling of success. If you are washing dishes, wash them as if you are the most successful person in the world. If you are writing an email, write it with a spirit of generosity. Here are 3 small ways to start the abundance circuit in your own life today. The tip test. The next time you pay for a meal or a coffee, give a slightly larger tip than usual. Do it with a smile and a genuine feeling of, there is plenty more where that came from. You are training your brain to believe in the flow. The value dump. Look for one person today you can help without expecting anything in return. Offer a compliment. Share a helpful link or help a neighbor carry their groceries. This moves your energy from getting to giving. The act as if moment. Pick one small thing today that an abundant person would do. Maybe it's using the good towels you usually save for guests. Maybe it's taking 10 minutes to sit in the sun instead of rushing to the next task. When you do these things, you aren't just being nice. You are physically changing your brain. You are moving from the high-stress brainwaves of survival into the calm, creative brainwaves of growth. You are clearing the static on your internal radio. The invisible river. It is easy to believe in abundance when things are going well. It is much harder when the car breaks down or the boss is grumpy. But those are the moments when the law of circulation matters most. Think of a river. Even in a drought, the water is still moving somewhere. It might be underground, or it might be evaporating into the clouds to become rain later. The water doesn't panic and stop moving. It trusts the cycle. When you feel the urge to grip, to complain about prices, to hide your talents, or to stay in a job you hate because you're scared, stop for a second. Take a breath. Realize that you are trying to dam up your own river. Abundance is a choice to trust the invisible cycle of life. It is the understanding that by letting go of the old, you make room for the new. It is the courage to buy the yellow daisies, even when things feel gray. The more you practice this, the more you will notice coincidences starting to happen. You might get a random refund check in the mail. A friend might call you with a business idea. You might find a $20 bill in an old coat pocket. These aren't accidents. They are the universe responding to your new frequency. You have tuned into the abundance station, and the music is finally starting to play. The sun does not ask for payment before it shines. The trees do not count how many leaves they give to the earth. They simply exist in a state of constant giving and receiving. You are a part of that same system. When you stop fighting the flow and start moving with it, you'll find that the world has more than enough for you. You don't have to work twice as hard to stay afloat. You just have to stop trying to hold back the tide. Chapter 3. Why does your mind resist change? The air in 1925 New York City tasted of coal smoke and expensive perfume. If you walk down the right street in Manhattan, you might hear the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a typewriter echoing from a high-ceilinged studio. Inside, Florence Scovel Shinn sat surrounded by her sketches and paintings. She was an artist by trade, but her real work was far more invisible. People came to her when their lives felt like a tangled ball of yarn. They were frustrated, broke, or lonely, and they all asked the same question: I want things to change, so why do I feel like I am fighting myself? Florence watched a woman sit across from her, twisting a damp handkerchief in her hands. The woman wanted a new home, a place with big windows and a garden. She had the money saved. She had the catalogs open. But every time she went to sign a lease, she found a reason to back out. The roof might leak. The neighbors might be loud. The taxes might go up. Her body would physically shake with anxiety at the thought of moving. To the woman, it felt like bad luck. To Florence, it looked like a garden overgrown with weeds that refused to be pulled. Florence understood something most people in the Roaring Twenties ignored. She knew that the mind was like a giant storehouse. It didn't care if what you put inside was good or bad, it just kept it safe. If you spent 20 years telling yourself that change is dangerous, your mind would treat a new house like a tiger jumping out of the bushes. It wasn't trying to make you miserable. It was trying to keep you alive by keeping you exactly where you were. The gatekeeper in your brain. We often think of our minds as one single thing, but it's more like a house with a very stubborn security guard living in the basement. This guard is your subconscious. While your conscious mind, the 5% of you that is awake and making choices, says, I want a promotion, the guard in the basement is looking at a dusty old rulebook from when you were 7 years old. That rulebook might say, don't stand out or people will laugh at you. When you try to manifest a new reality, you are essentially trying to hand the guard a new set of rules. The guard doesn't like new rules. New rules are unknown, and the unknown might be unsafe. This creates a physical feeling of tension. Scientists today call this homeostasis. It is the body's natural urge to stay the same. Just like your body works hard to keep your temperature at 98.6 degrees, your mind works hard to keep your life at the level you are used to. If you are used to having just enough money to pay the bills, your internal thermostat is set to scarcity. The moment you try to manifest abundance, it's like turning the air conditioner on in the middle of winter. Your subconscious mind notices the cold and immediately kicks the heater on to bring you back to the temperature it recognizes. This is why you might find yourself suddenly wasting money on things you don't need, or talking yourself out of a great job interview. You aren't being unlucky. You are being regulated by your own internal guard. Sarah's kitchen revelation. In Portland, the rain tapped against the window of the marketing agency's kitchen. Sarah Jenkins stood by the coffee pot, watching the dark liquid drip slowly into a stained mug. The smell of burnt beans filled the small room. Did you hear about the opening at Miller & Associates? A co-worker asked, leaning against the fridge. They're looking for a senior art director. It's basically double what we make here, and they actually win awards. Sarah's heart did a strange, uncomfortable flip-flop. For weeks, she had been writing in her journal about wanting more. She had been visualizing a career where her creativity was valued. This was the exact door she had been asking the universe to open. But as she stood there in the gray light of the kitchen, she didn't feel excited. She felt a cold, heavy weight settle in her stomach. "Oh, I'm not really qualified for that," Sarah said, the words coming out before she could even think. "They want someone with more big brand experience. Plus, the commute would be a nightmare across the bridge." As soon as the words left her mouth, she froze. She remembered the subconscious garden concept she had read about the night before. She had just spotted a massive, prickly weed in her own mind. Her conscious self wanted the job, but her subconscious was screaming that she wasn't enough. It was protecting her from the danger of being rejected, or worse, the danger of actually succeeding and having to prove she belonged there. She took a sip of the bitter coffee and realized she was her own biggest obstacle. The crab in the bucket. This resistance doesn't just come from inside us, it often shows up in the world around us. There is an old story about fishermen who keep crabs in a wooden bucket. They don't need a lid to keep the crabs from escaping. Why? Because the moment one crab starts to climb up the side of the bucket to reach the edge, the other crabs will reach up and pull it back down. Our subconscious minds do this with our thoughts. When you start to climb toward a new vibration, perhaps a vibration of wealth or deep love, your old thoughts will reach up and tug at your ankles. You might hear voices in your head saying, "Who do you think you are?" or "This won't last." Dr. Maxwell Maltz, a famous doctor in the 1950s, saw this happen in a very physical way. He was a plastic surgeon who realized that even after he fixed someone's nose or removed a scar, many patients still acted like they were ugly. Their physical reality had changed, but their self-image, the internal map of who they were, had stayed the same. He realized that we do not perform or behave based on how we actually look or what we actually have. We behave based on the blueprint inside our minds. If your blueprint says, "I am a struggling artist," you will find a way to stay struggling even if someone hands you $1 million. You will feel a deep sense of cognitive dissonance. This is a fancy way of saying your brain is having a tug of war. One side is the reality you see, and the other side is the story you believe. The story almost always wins, unless you learn how to rewrite the blueprint. The power of the spoken word. Florence Scovel Shinn taught her students that the fastest way to get past the guard in the basement was through the spoken word. She believed that the subconscious mind had no sense of humor and no ability to tell a joke. It took everything you said literally. She often told the story of a man who constantly joked about the wolf at the door. He was successful, but he always talked about how he might lose it all tomorrow. One day, the wolf actually showed up. His business failed, and he found himself in the very poverty he had joked about. Florence explained that he had worded himself into a hole. He had planted seeds of lack in his garden every single day, and eventually, they grew into a forest he couldn't ignore. To change the garden, you have to stop planting the same seeds. But you can't just stop thinking, you have to replace the old thoughts with something stronger. This is where affirmations come in. But they aren't just happy thoughts. They are commands to the subconscious. Identify the lie, notice the thought that makes you feel small. For Sarah, it was, "I'm not qualified." Isolate the feeling. Where do you feel it in your body? Is it a tight chest? A heavy stomach? Plant the new truth. Create a sentence that feels like a fact rather than a wish. Instead of saying, "I hope I get a better job," say, "I am grateful for the perfect position that values my talent." The trick is to say it until the guard in the basement gets tired of fighting you. At first the guard will say, "That's not true. Look at your bank account." But if you keep saying it with a calm, steady voice, eventually the guard will shrug and say, "Okay, I guess this is the new rule." The 95/5 rule. We spend most of our lives on autopilot. Research shows that about 95% of what we do, think, and feel every day is just a repeat of what we did yesterday. We brush our teeth the same way, drive the same route, and think the same worried thoughts about our taxes or our weight. Only 5% of our day is spent in creative mode. Manifestation is the act of taking that 5% and using it to hack the other 95%. It is like trying to turn a giant ship. If you turn the steering wheel just 1 inch, the ship doesn't seem to move at first. You might look at the water and think, "I'm still going the same way." This is the moment most people give up. They think the law of attraction isn't working because they don't see a new life in 24 hours. But deep under the water, the massive rudder has moved. The ship is beginning a long, slow curve. If you keep the wheel turned, a mile down the ocean, you will be heading in a completely different direction. Resistance is just the feeling of the water pushing against the rudder. It's not a sign that you are doing it wrong, it's proof that you are actually changing course. The storehouse of the mind. Florence Scovel Shinn once worked with a man who was desperately looking for work. He had all the skills, but he walked into every interview with a cloud over his head. He spoke about his past failures and how tough the market was. Florence told him to go out and buy a new pair of shoes. She told him to act as if he had already been hired and needed to look the part. He protested, saying he couldn't afford new shoes because he didn't have a job. Buy the shoes, she insisted. You are telling your subconscious that the job is already yours. You are preparing your storehouse for the shipment that is coming. The man bought the shoes. He wore them around his apartment. He polished them. He felt the weight of them on his feet, and imagined walking into a big office. A few days later, he got a call for an interview. He wore the new shoes. He didn't walk in like a man begging for a chance. He walked in like a man who already belonged there. He got the job before the interview was even over. This is the secret of bypassing resistance: preparation. If you want abundance, don't wait for the money to arrive to start feeling wealthy. Clear a space in your closet for the new clothes. Clean your car as if it's the luxury vehicle you've always wanted. When you act as if, you take the fear out of the change. You show your subconscious that the new reality is safe because you are already living in it. Reframing the wall. Most of us see resistance as a wall. We think that if we feel fear or doubt, we must be on the wrong path. We think that if we were meant to have something, it would be easy. But that is not how growth works. A seed has to crack its shell to become a tree. That cracking is violent and difficult, but it isn't bad. It is necessary. Instead of looking at your resistance as a wall, start looking at it as a compass. When you feel that flip-flop in your stomach or that voice saying, "I can't," it means you have reached the edge of your current map. You are standing at the border of the known world and the new world. The fear is just the guard at the gate, telling you that you are leaving the territory he knows how to protect. If you don't feel any resistance, you probably aren't changing much. Real manifestation requires you to push into the uncomfortable zone. When Sarah felt that weight in her stomach in the office kitchen, she could have let it stop her. She could have agreed with the weed and stayed in her cubicle for another 5 years. But once you know what resistance is, it loses its power over you. Sarah took a deep breath, ignored the burnt smell of the coffee, and looked at her coworker. "Actually," she said, her voice a little shaky but clear, "I think I am qualified. I'm going to update my portfolio tonight." The weight in her stomach didn't go away immediately. The guard in the basement didn't start cheering. But the rudder had moved 1 inch. The ship was starting to turn. Sarah wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was starting to see the garden for what it really was, a place where she chose what grew. Your mind will always resist change because its job is to keep you the same. But your job is to grow. Resistance is not the enemy. It is simply the friction created when a new, better version of you begins to rub against the old, small version of you. When you feel that friction, don't stop. It just means you're finally picking up speed. Chapter 4: The Day the Manifestation Stopped Working. Napoleon Hill sat in a large leather chair in a room that smelled of expensive cigars and old books. Across from him sat Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in the entire world. It was 1908, and Hill was just a young reporter looking for a story. He had no idea that his life was about to change in the next 60 seconds. Carnegie leaned forward and offered Hill a deal. He wanted Hill to spend the next 20 years of his life interviewing the most successful people on Earth to find out their secrets. There was one catch: Carnegie would not pay him a single penny for his work. He would only give him letters of introduction to famous people like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. Carnegie pulled a stopwatch from his pocket. He told Hill he had exactly 60 seconds to decide. If he took too long, the offer was off the table. Hill's heart hammered against his ribs. He was broke. He had no fame. He was a nobody from the hills of Virginia. But he felt something deep inside him click. At the 29-second mark, Hill said yes. He didn't know it then, but if he had waited just 31 seconds longer, the most famous book on success ever written, Think and Grow Rich, would never have existed. He narrowly avoided a life of total obscurity by a matter of seconds. The next 20 years were not filled with magic and easy money. This is the part of the story people usually skip. We like to hear about the yes and the success, but we hate talking about the middle. For 20 years, Napoleon Hill was often penniless. He lived through a world war. He faced ridicule from his family. He spent years writing and researching, while his friends were getting steady jobs and buying houses. He was teaching the world about the power of the mind, while his own bank account was empty. He was in the gap. This is the space between the moment you decide what you want and the moment it actually shows up in your hands. The invisible work of the whole. In 1929, builders started working on a project in New York City that most people thought was a bad idea. They wanted to build the tallest building in the world, the Empire State Building. For the first few months, if you walked by the construction site, you wouldn't see a skyscraper. You wouldn't even see a wall. All you would see was a giant, muddy, ugly hole in the ground. To the average person, it looked like a mess. It looked like nothing was happening. But the engineers knew the truth. The taller a building is going to be, the deeper the hole must be. They had to dig down to the solid rock to make sure the building wouldn't fall over when the wind blew. This is exactly what happens when you start trying to change your life. You start your mental work. You do your visualizations. You change your thoughts. And then, instead of a promotion or a bag of money falling from the sky, your car breaks down. Your boss gets grumpy. You feel more tired than usual. You look at your life and think, this manifestation stuff isn't working. It's actually getting worse. You think you are failing, but you are actually just digging the hole. You are clearing out the old soft dirt of your old habits, so you can reach the solid rock of a new character. If you try to build a skyscraper on top of mud, it will collapse. The universe is making sure your foundation is strong enough to hold the weight of the big dreams you are asking for. Sarah Jenkins stood on the side of a busy street in Portland, Oregon, staring at the hood of her old car. Steam was rising into the gray, rainy sky. She had been practicing her vibration checks for a full week. She had bought herself flowers. She had written in her journal. She had even stopped complaining about her small apartment. She felt like she was finally doing everything right. And yet here she was, late for work, with a car that sounded like a blender full of rocks before it finally died. She didn't just feel sad, she felt betrayed. She grabbed the steering wheel and let out a scream that made a man walking his dog jump in surprise. "It's a joke," she yelled to the empty car. "I try to be positive, and the universe gives me a broken engine. I'm done." She felt a crushing weight in her chest. It was the familiar feeling of not enoughness. She felt like the universe was playing a mean trick on her, laughing at her for thinking she could ever have a better life. She sat there for a long time, watching the rain blur her windshield. She was ready to throw her manifestation book into the trash. But then, she remembered something she had read about the bridge of incidents. This is a term used to describe the series of events that lead you to your goal. Sometimes those events look like disasters. A bridge isn't always a pretty, golden path. Sometimes it's a bumpy, scary road that feels like it's going the wrong way. Understanding the gestation period. Every seed has a gestation period. If you plant a radish seed, you will see a sprout in about 3 days. If you plant an acorn, you might not see anything for weeks, and it will take decades to become a giant oak tree. You cannot yell at an acorn to grow faster. You cannot dig it up every day to see if it's working. If you do, you will kill the plant. Most people treat their dreams like radishes. They want them to pop up overnight. But big dreams like financial freedom, a soulmate, or a career you love are oak trees. They have a natural timing that cannot be rushed. When you are in the gap, you aren't waiting for the universe to decide if you are good enough. You are waiting for the seeds you planted in your mind to grow through the soil of your physical reality. The first tool, audit the weight. When nothing is happening, ask yourself, is this a wall or a door? A wall means you are trying to force something that isn't right for you. A door means you are being prepared for something better. If your car breaks down, it might be a door that keeps you from being in a worse accident 10 miles down the road. Or it might be the event that forces you to talk to a neighbor who happens to have a lead on a new job. The second tool, the 48-hour no judgment rule. When something bad happens, commit to not judging it for 48 hours. Don't call it a disaster. Don't call it a failure. Just say, this is happening. By the time 48 hours have passed, the bridge of incidents usually starts to show itself. The anger fades, and you can see the next step more clearly. The third tool, hold the end image. Napoleon Hill realized that his 20 years of struggle were actually his training. If he had become rich in the first year, he wouldn't have understood the grit and persistence needed to teach others. He kept the image of the finished book in his mind, even when he was sleeping on a friend's couch. Your job in the gap is not to figure out how the car will get fixed. Your job is to stay focused on the feeling of being a person who is safe, successful, and provided for. The woman who didn't quit. In 1995, a woman was sitting on a delayed train, much like Napoleon Hill had sat on trains decades before. She was a single mother, living on government aid. She felt like a failure. She had a story in her head about a boy wizard, but every time she tried to move forward, life seemed to push her back. Her mother had died. She was divorced. She was poor. When she finally finished her book, she sent it to 12 different publishers. All 12 of them said no. They told her it was too long. They told her children wouldn't like it. They told her to get a day job because there was no money in children's books. This was her gap. For J.K. Rowling, the manifestation didn't just stop working, it looked like it had never started. If she had stopped at the 10th rejection, or the 11th, the world would never have known Harry Potter. She didn't have luck. She had what Napoleon Hill called definiteness of purpose. She knew the story was meant to be told. The rejections weren't a sign to stop. They were just part of the bridge of incidents that eventually led her to a small publishing house called Bloomsbury, where the daughter of the CEO happened to read the first chapter and loved it. Rowling's story proves that the no you hear from the world is often just a not yet, or a not this way. The gap is a test of your conviction. It asks the question, do you really want this, or were you just wishing for it when things were easy? Sarah decided to try the 48-hour no judgment rule. Instead of calling the tow truck while crying, she took a deep breath. She called her boss and explained she would be late. Her boss, who was usually a nightmare, actually sounded sympathetic. Take your time, Sarah. Actually, my brother owns a shop near there. Give him my name, and he'll give you a fair price. Sarah blinked. That was a small click in the bridge. When she got to the shop, she sat in the waiting room and pulled out her journal. Instead of writing about how much she hated her car, she wrote about how grateful she was to have a job to go to and a boss who helped her. She felt her internal radio dial move away from the static of rage and back toward the clear signal of peace. While she was waiting, she noticed a man sitting across from her. He was wearing a hat with the logo of a famous design firm, the very firm she had been dreaming of working for. They started talking. It wasn't a job interview. It was just a conversation between two people waiting for their cars. But by the time her car was fixed, she had his business card and an invitation to send him her portfolio. If her car hadn't broken down, she would have been at her desk staring at a computer screen, and she never would have met him. The disaster was the very thing that opened the door she had been knocking on for months. The law of the harvest. We live in a world of instant everything. We want the food now. We want the movie now. We want the success now. But the subconscious mind works on the law of the harvest. You cannot plant a seed in the morning and expect a harvest by dinner. Napoleon Hill finally published Think and Grow Rich in 1937, nearly 30 years after that first meeting with Carnegie. The book became a sensation. It has sold over 100 million copies. It has created more millionaires than perhaps any other piece of writing in history. If Hill had given up during the gap, during the years when he was broke and people called him a dreamer, he would have died a frustrated reporter. He realized that the reason manifestation stops working is often because we stop doing the work. We think the work is the external action, but the real work is the internal holding of the vision. When the world says no, the conscious architect says yes, even louder inside their own mind. Check your foundations. If things are falling apart, look at what is being removed. Are you losing a safe job so you can finally start the business you've talked about for years? Watch the bridge, stop looking for the how. Look for the next. The next step is usually small. It's a phone call, a chance meeting, or a sudden idea. Respect the gestation, give your dreams space to breathe. Trust that the universe is working on the back end of your life, even when the front end looks messy. The story of Napoleon Hill isn't just about a man getting rich. It's about a man who stayed true to a vision for 2 decades, while the world told him he was wrong. He understood that the gap wasn't a void. It was a bridge. Every rejection he faced, every hungry night he spent, and every mile he traveled was a necessary part of the person he had to become to write that book. Today, we see the same pattern in every major breakthrough. We see it in the scientist who fails 1,000 times before finding the cure. We see it in the athlete who trains for years for a race that lasts 10 seconds. The gap is where the magic is actually made. It is where your character is built. It is where your vibration is tested and hardened into something that can withstand the weight of your success. The next time you feel like the manifestation has stopped, or the universe has turned its back on you, remember the near miss of Napoleon Hill. Remember the 60-second timer. Remember that the hole in the ground is the first step toward the sky. You aren't being punished. You are being prepared. Keep walking across the bridge, even if you can't see the other side yet. The other side is already there, waiting for you to arrive. Chapter 5: 7 Pillars of Subconscious Alignment. Roughly 95% of the thoughts you have today are the exact same thoughts you had yesterday. For most people, life feels like a movie they have already seen 1,000 times. They wake up at the same time, drink the same coffee, drive the same way to work, and feel the same level of stress about their bank accounts. This isn't because they are lazy or because the world is against them. It is because the human brain is designed to keep things the same. It loves patterns, even if those patterns make us miserable. In the early 1900s, a man named Wallace Wattles was living proof of this cycle. If you saw him walking down the street in Elwood, Indiana, in the year 1890, you wouldn't have thought he was a man who knew the secrets of the universe. He looked like a man who had been beaten down by life. He was in his late 50s, and by almost every standard of the time, he was a failure. He had spent years working hard, trying different jobs, and pouring his energy into various projects, but nothing seemed to stick. He was poor, his health was failing, and he felt like he was running on a treadmill that never moved forward. Wattles was obsessed with one question: why do some people seem to attract wealth and success without effort, while others work themselves to the bone and stay broke? He began to spend every spare minute reading the works of great thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He looked at the lives of the most successful people of his era. Slowly, he began to see a pattern that had nothing to do with luck or even hard work in the traditional sense. He realized that there was a certain way of doing things. He saw that the universe wasn't a collection of random accidents, but a structured system that followed specific rules. If a person could align their mind with these rules, success wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. In 1910, he sat down and wrote a small book called The Science of Getting Rich. He didn't write it to be a philosopher. He wrote it as a manual for people who needed results right away. He argued that getting rich is not about doing things in a frantic, desperate way. It is about doing things in a certain way. This certain way was the foundation of what we now call the 7 pillars of subconscious alignment. The pillars that hold up your world. When you build a house, you don't start with the roof. You don't even start with the walls. You start with the foundation and the pillars that will hold the weight of everything else. Manifestation works the same way. Most people try to wish for things without having the pillars in place. This is like trying to hang a heavy chandelier from a ceiling made of paper. It might hold for a second, but eventually, it's going to come crashing down. Wallace Wattles discovered that when these pillars are aligned, you stop chasing your goals and start allowing them to come to you. The first pillar is clarity. This sounds simple, but most people are remarkably vague about what they want. They say they want more money or a better life. If you walk into a restaurant and tell the waiter you want some food, he won't know what to bring you. He might bring you a bowl of plain white rice or a plate of snails. You have to be specific. Wattles taught that you must have a clear, mental picture of what you want. You have to see it in your mind until it feels as real as the chair you are sitting in. The second pillar is desire. This isn't a weak wish. It is a burning hunger. It is the fuel that keeps you going when the external world looks like it isn't changing. Wattles believed that the universe wants you to have what you want because your success adds to the total beauty and wealth of the world. Your desire is actually the universe trying to express itself through you. The third pillar is belief. This is where most people stumble. Belief isn't just saying you think something will happen. It is a deep, quiet knowing. It is the same way you believe the sun will rise tomorrow morning. You don't worry about it. You don't stay up all night checking the horizon. You just know. The fourth pillar is acceptance. This means you have to be okay with having the thing you want. Many people subconsciously feel they don't deserve success. They feel like they are cheating, or that someone else has to lose for them to win. Acceptance is the act of opening your hands and saying, I am ready to receive this. The fifth pillar is gratitude. This was perhaps the most important part of the certain way. Wattles insisted that you must be grateful for what you have now, and even more importantly, grateful for the things you haven't received yet. Gratitude connects your mind to the source of abundance. It keeps you from falling into the trap of looking at lack. The sixth pillar is action. This is where many modern manifestation teachers get it wrong. They think you can just sit on a couch and think your way to $1 million. Wattles was very clear, you must act in the present. You cannot act in the past, and you cannot act in the future. You must do everything you can do today, as perfectly as you can do it, with the mental image of your success held firmly in your mind. This is inspired action. The seventh pillar is release. This is the Sabbath state. It is the ability to let go of the how. You do your part, and then you trust the universe to do its part. If you plant a seed in a garden and dig it up every 5 minutes to see if it's growing, you will kill the plant. You have to leave it alone and let the soil and the sun do their work. A morning in Portland. While Wallace Wattles was figuring this out in a dusty room in 1910, Sarah Jenkins was trying to figure it out in her cluttered studio apartment in modern-day Portland. It was 6 a.m., and the rain was tapping against her window like a persistent finger. Sarah felt the usual weight in her chest, the not enough feeling that had followed her since college. She looked at her small kitchen table. She had cleared away the pile of unpaid bills and the half-empty pizza box. In their place, she had set up what she called her manifestation altar. It wasn't anything fancy. It was just a small wooden shelf with a single white candle, a small succulent plant she'd managed not to kill, and a brand new notebook with a leather cover. Sarah felt silly. Part of her brain was screaming that this was a waste of time. You have $15,000 in debt, Sarah, the voice whispered. A candle isn't going to pay that off. Go back to sleep. But she remembered the certain way. She remembered that her current reality was just a reflection of her past thoughts. If she wanted a new reality, she had to build new pillars. She lit the candle. The small flame danced, casting long shadows on the walls. She opened her notebook and began to work on the first pillar, clarity. She didn't just write, I want a new job. She wrote about the smell of the air in a high-end design firm. She wrote about the sound of her heels on a polished concrete floor. She wrote about the feeling of a paid-in-full stamp on her credit card statement. For 30 minutes, Sarah didn't look at her phone. She didn't check her email. She just sat in the certain way. She practiced the fifth pillar, gratitude, by saying thank you for her current apartment, even though it was small. She thanked the universe for the cat, Pixel, who was currently batting at her shoelaces. She was building a routine. She wasn't just wishing, she was training her brain to tune into a different frequency. As she blew out the candle and got ready for her bus ride to a job she still didn't like, she felt a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't quite happiness yet. It was a sense of discipline. She had made a promise to herself, 30 days of the 7 pillars, no matter what. She was no longer a passenger in her own life. She was starting to be the architect. The science of waiting. The idea that we can change our reality by changing our internal state isn't just a feeling. It has been tested in some of the most famous psychology experiments in history. In the 1960s, a professor at Stanford University named Walter Mischel conducted what we now call the marshmallow test. He would bring a child into a room and place a single marshmallow on the table in front of them. He told the child, "I have to leave the room for a few minutes. If the marshmallow is still here when I get back, you can have 2 marshmallows. But if you eat it now, you don't get another one." This experiment was a perfect look at the pillars of belief and release. The children who were able to wait were the ones who truly believed the second marshmallow was coming. They didn't stare at the first marshmallow and cry. They didn't poke it or smell it. They turned their backs. They sang songs. They looked at the wall. They released the desire and trusted the promise. Years later, researchers followed up with these children. The ones who had the discipline to wait for the second marshmallow were significantly more successful in life. They had higher SAT scores, lower body fat, and better jobs. They had mastered the ability to stay in a state of acceptance for a future result, even when the empty space where the second marshmallow should be, was staring them in the face. This is exactly what Wallace Wattles was talking about. Most people fail to manifest because they eat the marshmallow too soon. They get frustrated after 3 days because they don't see $1 million in their bank account. They lose their belief and their gratitude, and they fall back into their old radio dial of stress and scarcity. The rules of the champion. If you want to see the 7 pillars in action in the modern world, you don't have to look much further than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Long before he was a movie star or a governor, he was a skinny kid in Austria with a dream that seemed impossible. Arnold used the pillar of clarity with surgical precision. He didn't just want to be a bodybuilder. He had a specific picture of himself, standing on a stage in America with a trophy over his head. He knew exactly how his muscles would look. He knew exactly how the lights would feel on his skin. He applied the pillar of action by training for 5 or 6 hours a day, but he did it with a certain way. While other bodybuilders looked like they were suffering, Arnold was always smiling. He was happy because in his mind, every representative was bringing him closer to the picture he had already created. He was acting as if the goal was already achieved. He didn't care that people laughed at his accent or told him his name was too long for Hollywood. He had the pillar of acceptance. He had already accepted that he was a champion. The world just hadn't caught up to the news yet. Building your own pillars. The 7 pillars are not a magic spell. They are a way of organizing your energy so that you stop fighting yourself. When your clarity matches your action and your belief is backed by gratitude, you become a vibrational match for the things you want. Think about a radio tower. If the tower is bent or the wires are loose, the signal will be fuzzy. You might hear bits of the music, but mostly you just get static. The 7 pillars are like the structural supports of that tower. They keep the transmitter steady and tall so the signal can go out strong and clear. Clarity. Write down exactly what you want. Use numbers, colors, and feelings. Desire. Ask yourself why you want it. Find the reason that makes your heart beat faster. Belief. Find one small piece of evidence that what you want is possible. Build on that. Acceptance. Practice saying, "I am worthy of this," until you stop flinching when you say it. Gratitude. List 10 things you are thankful for right now, especially the small things. Action. Do one thing today that moves you toward your goal, even if it's just making a phone call or cleaning your desk. Release. At the end of the day, tell yourself it is done. Stop worrying about the how. Sarah Jenkins didn't know it yet, but her 30-day commitment was already changing the way her brain worked. By lighting that candle and writing in that notebook, she was physically changing the neural pathways in her head. She was pruning the weeds in her subconscious garden and planting the seeds of the certain way. She was moving from a fixed mindset, where she believed she was stuck with her lot in life, to a growth mindset, where she realized that her environment was simply waiting for her instructions. It is a strange truth of the world that the hardest part of manifestation isn't the work. It's the waiting. It's the gestation period. Just like a baby takes 9 months to grow and a corn seed takes weeks to sprout, your new reality needs time to form in the physical world. The pillars are what keep you standing during that waiting period. They are what prevent you from giving up when the car won't start or the boss is grumpy. They remind you that the weather of the external world has nothing to do with the climate of your internal world. When you look at a massive bridge, like the Golden Gate Bridge, you see the cars and the orange paint and the beautiful cables. But the only reason those things can exist is because of the massive pillars that go deep beneath the water, anchored into the solid rock of the earth. Without those hidden supports, the bridge would be swept away by the first storm. Your life is the same. Your bank account, your relationships, and your health are the cars and paint. They are the parts everyone sees. But your subconscious alignment is the pillar beneath the water. If you want to build something that lasts, you have to stop worrying about the paint and start focusing on the foundation. This deep work is what connects your small, individual life to the much larger patterns of the universe. It is how a man like Wallace Wattles can go from a failing laborer to a world-renowned author, and how a woman like Sarah Jenkins can go from a frustrated passenger to a conscious architect. Interestingly, this process of building mental pillars is not unlike the way a spider spins a web. The spider doesn't chase flies. It doesn't run around looking for a meal. It spends its time and energy building a structure that is perfectly designed to catch what it needs. Once the web is finished, the spider simply sits in the center and waits. It trusts the architecture. It knows that because the web is built in a certain way, the results are inevitable. Chapter 6: Mastering the Art of Scripting Your Reality. If you walk down 48th Street in Manhattan today, you will see a city that never stops moving. You'll hear the hiss of bus brakes and the constant tapping of phone screens. It is a place made of glass, steel, and people in a very big hurry. But if you could peel back the layers of time to a cold evening in 1943, the air would feel different. The streetlights would be dimmer. The sounds of jazz would drift out of basement clubs. In a small, rented room, a man named Neville Goddard stood before a group of people who were tired of being stuck. These people weren't looking for a magic trick. They were living through a world war. Everything felt heavy and out of their control. They felt like tiny leaves being blown around by a giant wind. Neville stood at the front of the room, looking calm and sure of himself. He told them something that sounded impossible. He told them that their outer world was just a shadow. He said the real world, the one that actually decided what happened to them, was sitting right between their ears. To prove it, he gave them a challenge that many people still talk about today. It is called the ladder experiment, and it is the best way to understand how to rewrite the story of your life. Neville told his students that for the next 3 nights, they had to do something very specific before they fell organized to sleep. He told them to close their eyes and imagine they were standing in front of a tall wooden ladder. He didn't want them to just look at the ladder in their minds like they were watching a movie. He wanted them to feel themselves being there. He told them to imagine reaching out their left hand and feeling the rough, cold wood of the side rail. Then he wanted them to lift their right foot and place it on the first step. He told them to feel the weight of their body shifting. In their minds, they had to climb that ladder step by step, all the way to the top. When they got to the top, they had to climb back down. They had to do this over and over until they drifted off.